Part 1, Question 2, Article 1, whether the existence of God is self-evident. Well, that depends, of course, on what it means to be self-evident. Two examples given by Thomas are quantity and number. Those things are self-evident. If someone does not believe that 1 plus 1 equals 2, there's really no use arguing them into believing that it does. If, however, somebody does not agree or does not know about the Pythagorean theorem, that's something that can be demonstrated. That's true, but not self-evident. It can be shown, it can be discovered. Also, people know about quantity, but it might not be self-evident that two different containers of different shapes have the same volume. You can, however, show that they do. Back to the question, Thomas cites as his authority David. The fool saith in his heart, there is no God. Now, when you hear that, you might focus on the word fool. Focus instead, however, on what the fool is saying, that there is no God. Because the fool can say that, it must be possible to say, you wouldn't say, the fool says that 1 plus 1 doesn't equal 2. That person would not be foolish. That person would be joking or very strange indeed. No one denies the existence of numbers, but atheists exist. And that's enough to show that the existence of God is not self-evident. Arguments are needed and necessary, and that's what the Summa will give us. Objection 1. Some knowledge is naturally implanted in us by God, including our conscience. There are some things that you cannot not know. Even if you pretend to not know that these things are wrong, your conscience speaks to you. Objection 2 is St. Anselm's ontological proof. Ontological, a proof that is purely logical, requiring no sense observation to work, really requiring no cosmos to work. Define God as that which nothing greater could be conceived. Such a thing would have to exist because existing is greater than not existing. Objection 3. Truth must exist, and God is the truth. Think about it. I like this here. If truth did not exist, then the sentence, quote, truth does not exist, would be true, which is impossible. Think about that. Thomas replies by making a distinction. The existence of God is certainly true. It is logically necessary, but that does not mean it is self-evident to us. In other words, arguments for God's existence are still profitable. This is a statement about human epistemology, not a statement about the divine attributes. We'll get to those. Reply to objection 1, quote, to know that God exists in general and in a confused way is implanted in us by nature, inasmuch as God is man's beatitude. God is our highest end and our only true happiness. But, Thomas continues, quote, to know that someone is approaching is not the same as knowing that it is Peter who is approaching, even though it is Peter who is approaching. You hear somebody in the hallway, you're like, oh, I hear somebody, and then it turns out to be Peter, but you didn't really know it was Peter, you just heard somebody. Many seek and fail to find their happiness in things other than God. And Thomas does not refute St. Anselm's proof. He does note, however, that not everyone finds it convincing. Someone might claim that God is not the greatest thing that can be thought. Someone else could claim that the greatest thing does not necessarily have to exist. I've heard somebody say, well, let's just define God as the smelliest smell that ever existed, and that smell would have to exist. And that is wrong for a variety of reasons, but they could still think that. Objection 3, quote, the existence of truth in general is self-evident, but the existence of a primal truth is not self-evident to us being the key part of that phrase. Each of these three objections points towards God, but they do so in a vague and in a confused way, and this is part of Thomas's program here. He's starting with our epistemology, starting with what it means to know things as a human knows things, simple things like numbers exist, objects exist, and then he will carefully build up to higher and higher causes, and that is a project. So no, God's existence is not self-evident, even if it is logically necessary.